Hello and welcome to the forest. This time I'm also reviewing a camera in the Canon G series, the Canon G7 from 2006. When it comes to the G series, the G7 seems to be one of the less popular ones. You hear a lot about G2, G6, G9 and so on, but not so much about the G7. When the G7 was released, it got a lot of critique for removing a lot of key features or distinguishing features from the Canon G series. The biggest thing that changed is probably the lens, I would say, because they went from an f2 lens at the wide end to an f2.8. So it's a bit of a downgrade in that regard, but on the other hand, they increased the zoom range. So instead of going to 140mm max, it now goes to 210mm. And also they added image stabilization, so that does help when photographing in low light, especially if you're using a bit longer focal length. Another big thing that changed is the screen. Instead of having the fully articulating screen like on the G5 and G6, you now have a fixed screen. But on the other hand, they did increase the resolution and the screen is a little bit bigger, so that's some good points. This is one change that I really don't like because I'm using the flippy screen a lot on the G5. When photographing, I find it much more convenient to have the camera close like this and looking down into it. It's also much more easy to keep it stable that way. Than to have it in front of you and look at it like that. There is a viewfinder on the back though, but it's something I kind of forget to mention when reviewing the Canon G series cameras, because it's not that useful, to be honest. You don't get the same outline as the screen, and also there is no exposure information in it. Also it's kind of small, so yeah, it's not so good for composing your photos. It's mostly useful when the weather is very sunny. Otherwise, I haven't really used it that much. On top of the camera, they have removed the information LCD. But to be honest, this is actually a good change because it wasn't really that useful. And on the G7, there is a, ISO dial instead. So it's a bit more practical, I think, in that way. Another unpopular change they did was to remove the RAW files. But that's actually not a big problem anymore today because you can reactivate them with the help of hacks. There is the Canon Hack development kit, with the help of which you can get around this limitation and reactivate the RAW files. Of course, do it at your own risk, but I haven't had any problems with it. It's quite safe to use, I think. There are also some smaller changes, like the IR remote doesn't work anymore, and the batteries were changed to lower capacity ones. And also they went from CF cards to SD cards, but that's a good change, I would say, because they're a bit easier to find these days, the SD cards. The camera body itself has also been redesigned quite a lot. Okay, this is a Canon G5, not a G6, but it's not that different from the G6 when it comes to the form factor. And yeah, the difference is really quite remarkable because now the G7 is much more compact. You can actually fit it in your pocket easily. Yeah, the lens doesn't stick out anymore. Also, the button layout has been improved a lot, at least compared to the G5. I don't know with the G6, but you have this wheel here for selecting or navigating the menus, and also the buttons, they feel much better, much more intuitive, and the camera is much more responsive. Especially so when opening the camera, it really goes out quickly compared to the G5. So you can quite quickly, if you see something interesting, you can very easily get into your firing mode, like a few seconds, and you can take a picture. So it's quite snappy in that way. Another improvement is the lens cap, or actually the lack of one. Instead it has this flaps that open. On the older G5, if you don't remove this cap, the camera will not start. You have to remove it and start it again. It's a bit of a hassle, but this you don't have to remember to remove the cap. Of course, you could use it without the lens cap, but then you risk getting scratches on your lens. To me, at least, the G7 does feel like a modern compact camera, based on the form factor and the speed of it. So it's very nice to use. So how is the image quality of the Canon G7? Well, it uses a 10 megapixel CCD sensor, and that is actually quite a good resolution for a compact camera, especially one with quite a small sensor like the G7. Of course, it's still bigger than the average compact camera, but it's not very big at all, really. When you are photographing in good light, I would say that the images turn out very well. The lens is sharp across the frame, so really nothing big to complain about there. Low light performance is a bit so-so, which is, as expected with a camera like this. The colors remind me of the Canon 400D. Of course, they use very different sensors. The 400D has a CMOS sensor, but they have the same processor, they are the same generation, they even use the same battery. So it's not unlikely that they would have a similar color science. One thing that actually surprised me with the camera is the video mode, not because it would have very like high quality, but because it is sort of in between being like too bad and too good. The resolution is 640 by 480, so VGA. You can also get 1024 by 68, but then you get only 15 FPS. With the VGA mode you get 30 FPS, so the higher resolution is not so useful. But at the VGA mode, I don't know, there is something about the image quality. It looks a bit like a camcorder. It has a nice roughness to it. Of course, the image stabilization makes a huge difference. When zooming in quite a lot or fully, it still keeps it kind of stable. So yeah, I really like the, let's say, camcorder quality you get of the video mode from this camera. There are some limitations, of course, to it. I mean, you get the typical CCD glitches, but that I actually kind of like, so that's not a problem. One thing that is a problem though is that you cannot zoom while recording. Okay, you get the digital zoom, but that is kind of useless, to be honest. I suppose they made this limitation because the lens makes a lot of noise when it's zooming, but that's not a problem for my camera because the microphone is broken here. It doesn't produce any sound other than a hiss, so that's not a big issue. You can, with the help of hacks, get around this limitation. I tried it, but the camera crashed when I did it, so I don't know if it is because the battery is too old in the camera, it cannot produce enough power to simultaneously record and zoom. I will experiment a bit more with that, try a bit newer battery and see if it helps. Would I recommend this camera? Well, if you are into the Canon G series, well, definitely try it out. It's not that different from the Canon G9. The biggest difference is that you have the RAW files activated and 12 megapixels on the G9. And some small improvements also, but yeah, it's not such a big difference really. The biggest thing I do miss is the flippy screen, so next I think I will try out the Canon G11 because that's when they reintroduced the flippy screen. So that is all I have to say about the Canon G7 for now. Thank you for watching and see you in my next video. Bye!